This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Assuming this is going out,
yes,
we're on time for the first time for a few weeks. We are in our new studio. Things seem to be working. The touchscreen's working. Fingers crossed. This will be a smoother experience for all of us.
And I remember my name as well. I'm Clare Nazir, and who are you?
I'm Aidan McGivern. We're both meteorologists here at the Met Office. We are in the Met Office headquarters in Exeter, reporting to you directly from the Operations Centre. And we've got lots to talk about today.
Yes.
World weather, of course. We've got the UK weather. And we're going to be talking about the most important forecast of all time. Not the forecast for this week, but a forecast 75 years ago. Yeah. It was crucial. We're going to be talking about that with a couple of special guests a little bit later on. And of course, we're going to be covering the very important forecast for this week, the wet weather forecast.
Although we do have an interesting map to show you as well.
This is a
and that's why sometimes us weather forecasters say we do need the rain, even though we'd like the rain at night, really, wouldn't we? By day, a bit of sunshine. But yeah, here down in Devon, it's been quite cloudy and wet all day, really. And there's a weather warning out, which we'll tell you about in a moment for Northern Ireland a bit later. So please send in your comments and your questions. We're live, as Aidan says, on YouTube, on Twitter and on Facebook. We'll be replying to some of those, and I'll be sitting in the seat, the chair of weather wisdom a little bit later.
Not the stool.
Not the stool.
Not the stool,
no. It's definitely a seat. Discussing some of your comments and just trying to illuminate a little bit on what's going on over the next few days, because it is quite a wet week. But first of all...
Yeah, we've had a question in already from Andrew Baldock, YouTube. Does the jet stream influence our weather from the USA, and why does it happen? We're always talking about how the jet stream is influenced by weather events in the USA and how that can have ripple effects downstream and impact our weather. And actually, we've got an even clearer illustration of that than normal, because I don't know if any of you saw the really vivid sunsets and sunrises earlier this week. Some beautiful fiery reds in the sky, all because of increased particles in the atmosphere. And they were shown up on this satellite image, just circled in red there. You can see these smoke and ash particles. Now, these were carried all the way across the world by the jet stream from Canada. Wildfires over Canada a week or so ago, and that smoke was carried by that fast-flowing current of air high in the sky. And this map here illustrates it. The jet stream shown in red, the red arrows along the bottom there. Canada on one side of the screen, and then you've got the UK just on the far side here.
So what we're talking about, 4,000 miles, would you say? That it's travelled 4,000 miles over a few days?
Yeah, it would take a few days.
The average wind speed, jet stream, about 200 miles an hour, so on average, so yeah.
A few days to take those particles all the way across the Atlantic, but then we saw some beautiful sunrises and sunsets as a result. So that's just an illustration of how the weather is connected. But of course, we're often talking about storms and heat waves and all sorts of things going on in North America, which can often buckle the jet stream, and like a skipping rope, we often use that analogy, send a ripple downstream, and we get impacts on our weather downstream. And that's been happening quite a lot recently with storms over the US, and that can end up altering the position of the jet stream a few days later for ourselves.
And in fact, the smoke absorbs the blue light, and that's why we get those beautiful reddy and orangey hues. So yeah, really sort of science in action, really, isn't it?
It's a beautiful thing to witness.
Beautiful. Not only have we seen some lovely oranges in our skies, there's a lot of oranges on this map here. This is India and the subcontinent. The highest temperatures recorded in the world so far this year was across Pakistan, Jacobabad in Pakistan, central Pakistan. Yesterday saw a temperature of 51 degrees Celsius. Very, very hot conditions. They're oppressive conditions, and that's been continuing over the last few days or so. Now, today, over the last 24 hours, Truro, which is about a couple of 100 miles west of New Delhi in the desert of Rajasthan. Did you know there was a desert in Rajasthan?
I've been there actually on holiday, and I can confirm it's hot. It wasn't that hot when I went. I went earlier in the year, but yeah, it gets really hot in that part of the world, doesn't it, at this time of year?
It's funny, isn't it? Because I've been to Amritsar, and this is not a competition, but I've been to Amritsar, which is on the border of Pakistan and India, and it's verdant. The land is so green. That's where the Golden Temple is. So I was quite confused. I'd like to know what happens there, why it's so dry. Maybe we can talk about that some other time, but certainly it must be very, very dry there right now in Truro. The temperature 50.3 degrees Celsius. The wind's coming in off the Arabian Sea, so perhaps a bit more humid along the coast. But the other interesting things we can see from this map, lots of intense thunderstorms happening across in Bangladesh. That's east of Calcutta. And we're concerned here because we're expecting a lot of rain, some large hail, even some tornadoes. And the third aspect of this map is where the rain is right now. So we're into monsoon season, but it is late. It's late by about a week or so. And, you know, people do get concerned. Most of the rain, 90% of the rain across India happens during the monsoon season. So they really do need this rain. Across much of India last year, it was just about deficient away from Kerala. And the rain is still just to the south of Sri Lanka. So we're expecting it to move northwards. It may jump, it may accelerate. Something called the MGO Phase 8 may come into being next week. We'll ask Alex Deacon to explain that when he's
the expert.
His annual leave, yes. And so we're expecting this rain to travel northwards, but it's not going to reach these parts until perhaps even July. So a lot of dry weather to come, those oppressive temperatures, and they are likely to continue through the next few days.
Yeah, so the longer that rain stays away, the stronger that heat wave builds. So we'll be looking at that closely. Not only was it the hottest place in the world so far this year, the UK had its highest temperature so far this year at the weekend on the 1st of June, and then followed on quickly on the 2nd of June. This was the 2nd of June, this was Sunday, and you could see the heat by this stage, although it wasn't countrywide on Saturday. It was mostly England and Wales, but by Sunday it's just
England,
restricted.
To be honest. Yeah.
So
I was in Wales, it was Parky. Northwest Wales.
Yeah, you chose your holiday location badly, didn't you?
It's no insider information sometimes. But yes, Weybourne in Norfolk, where we've both lived in Norfolk, haven't we? Yeah. We've come full circle. We really have. Yeah, it was very hot there, wasn't it?
So they got 28.2 Celsius on Sunday, and it's now cooled down significantly. So typical British weather. Unlike last year, we've had 1, maybe 2 days of hot weather, followed by a week of rain. So we're going to be talking about the rain.
Yeah, and Jonathan Van Dijk, I hope that I've pronounced that properly, possibly not, from YouTube. So what's the likelihood of having higher temperatures again like we did over the weekend? Now, not everyone did, but yes, you did across much of England. It's not looking great for the next week or so, is it, Aidan?
No, but we're only at the beginning of June, aren't we? A lot of summer still to go.
Well, this time last year, though.
Yeah, we were already halfway through an extraordinary 3 months from May to the end of July.
So yes, it's a watch this space, but we'll be giving you more details about through the programme.
A couple more questions. Andrew Baldock, again, YouTube, what's the difference between a monsoon and windy and wet weather? Well, monsoon, that means season, doesn't it? Yeah. From an Arabic word. And monsoon doesn't necessarily, we associate it with rain, don't we? But it doesn't necessarily
so shifting
mean
winds
rain.
from one direction to another, and that's what happens in the Indian monsoon, the southwest monsoon, which is happening just about right now.
Yeah, so you get one dry season, one wet season because of a shift in winds. Wet and windy weather, well, we get that.
Yeah.
You could say this is the start of the British monsoon. I don't know, we'll have to see how it plays out, but there's something that people talk about, the European monsoon, because often we get a spell of more settled weather, high pressure, during sort of like mid to late spring. And then the jet stream sometimes kicks into life again around June and notoriously brings wet weather to Wimbledon and so on. And some people call it the European monsoon, where the jet stream.
And in fact, August seems to be a little bit of a wetter month than some months through the autumn. That's why this year I'm planning a holiday in August just to coincide with that. And again, that's just projection rather than any sort of scientific theory there. But it could pan out quite well. Okay.
Glyn Watson's going to the Spice Girls, Sunderland on Thursday.
Can you give us a little line from the Spice Girls?
Can I?
Yeah, zigga zigga.
Zigga zigga, two become one.
Two become one, there you go.
Yeah,
see, we are down with the kids. Well, kids who are now probably in their 30s and 40s.
It goes for me.
Yeah. Thursday's not too bad, actually.
Hope it'll be good weather for the weather.
Sunderland's always good weather in Sunderland. In fact, it's probably the best day of the week weather-wise. You've got the rain across the far north and some showers in the south, so you're in the sort of the central swathe, and it's looking quite dry there, but we will give you some more details on that a bit later on in the programme. But first of all...
Well, you think the weather this week is bad. Nothing's changed really for 75 years. We've always had horrible weather, low pressure systems. Taking a closer look at this map on the screen here, this shows low pressure just to the northwest of Scotland there. This is 75 years ago today. And you can see, actually, the weather was even worse because the UK's there, shown just in between these weather fronts, and the closeness of these isobars. It was windy, it was wet, and it was absolutely foul weather, not just on this day 75 years ago, but for much of June. And why does that matter? Because, of course, we are approaching the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And the weather was crucial. In fact, the weather forecast for D-Day was perhaps the most important forecast of all time. I'm joined by Catherine Ross, Met Office archivist, and Rebecca Griffiths, the Education Outreach Learning Consultant. I said I'd forget that. Have I got it wrong?
No, you got it right. Education Outreach.
And you two know an awful lot about the weather forecast that was made 75 years ago. Let's put it into context first, because there's a lot of talk this week about D-Day. What exactly happened around D-Day? Why was it crucial to get the weather forecast right?
Okay, so D-Day is essentially the Allied invasion of Normandy. So that's the point at which the Allied forces re-invaded Europe and started to try and win World War II. That operation basically involved trying to transport the population of a small city and all the supplies they needed 100 miles across the sea overnight in the dark secretly. So that was quite a major operation to undertake, and the whole thing completely relied on the weather because they needed to cross the English Channel.
So you mentioned it was in the dark, so they needed help, didn't they? They needed help from the moon.
Yes. So there was a set of ideal conditions they were looking for. It had to be within 1 and 4 days of a full moon. They needed low tide at dawn to enable the landing craft to actually get to the beaches. The cloud conditions, they needed less than 30% cloud cover at 8,000 feet and below. And that would allow some of the bombing, but also to allow the paratroopers who were dropped overnight before the actual waterborne forces reached the beaches. All of those had to come together, and they needed wind conditions of both at force 4 or less. Now, they calculated the odds of that without the moon in there were 13 to 1.
Yeah.
And with the moon, increased by threefold.
Wow. So the moon was important, and there were only a few days in June where you had the right tides and the right moon, wasn't there?
Yeah. Between the 3rd and the 6th of June, and then between the 19th and 21st, you had the right tides, but not the right moon, but it was about the only other option.
So on the screen now, we've got the weather map for the 5th of June, which was intended to be the original D-Day, wasn't it? That was in the plan, planning that went on for months beforehand. 5th of June, but I mean, this map just shows atrocious weather. You've got low pressure to the north of Scotland, you've got weather fronts moving through. It just wasn't going to happen on the 5th of June.
No, not a chance.
Now, the British knew this and the Germans knew this.
Absolutely.
But there was one important difference between what the British knew and the Germans. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But these are the guys that made the decision, weren't they, ultimately?
Yeah, so you've got here Eisenhower, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs. He was essentially responsible for making the final decision, we go or we don't go. So he had to make the decision on the 4th of June that they weren't going to invade on the 5th. And he also had to make the decision on the 5th that they obviously were going to go ahead. And when I say the 4th of June, I mean 3 o'clock in the morning on the 4th of June for the 5th and 3 o'clock in the morning on the 5th for the 6th. There's quite a lot of lag in this to allow the troops to actually get across the channel to start with.
Now, Rebecca, we talked about how the British knew it was going to be bad weather and they postponed it from the 5th. The Germans were expecting terrible weather all week, weren't they? So they thought, well, there's no chance there would be anything happening that week because they were expecting terrible weather. Now, we've got a map here of the 4th of June. There's the UK with lots of observations on it. If I skip forward to the next map, this is the German equivalent. And just to point out that there's the UK in the top corner here, and that's Germany. What's the difference between those two maps?
So the weather observations were were intercepted by Bletchley Park, and they were under the Enigma code, which we had broken. And these were dispatched by a rider twice a day to the Met Office at Dunstable. And at Dunstable Met Office, they used the cipher key and decoded the observations and plotted them on a map with a transparent overlay. And because of this, they obviously wanted it to be secret. They didn't want everybody knowing what was going on. So only certain people were privy to these observations, and including that was Stagg in that. So
Group Captain James Stagg, he ultimately came up with the final say about the weather forecast. And just 75 years ago, the same as today, weather observations are crucial, because if you don't know what the weather's doing now, you can't predict it, you can't project it forward into the future. And you can see on this map here, the Germans had weather observations for Germany, not for the UK. However, the UK had observations for the UK and for Germany.
And you can see a few spurious, maybe, observations in there, possibly.
Are they incorrect observations?
We think they're more. We don't know. They could come from two sources. They could be German planes overflying and making observations, but the British did have air superiority, so it may be, it may not be. The other possibility is that they are actually being sent back by spy rings that have been broken, because all of the German spy rings in the UK had been broken. They were all double agents at this point. But in order to make it sound like you're a genuine spy ring, one of the things you would send back would be an observation of the weather data. So it's probably accurate, just not very helpful, because there's not much of it. And nothing, as you can see, nothing for the Atlantic, where most of the weather comes from. They couldn't see any of that. So they couldn't see that sort of that weather coming in, which is why this front's not in quite the same place as you'd have seen on the British chart.
So there's an advantage, isn't there, to the UK being at the forefront of low pressure systems coming in from the Atlantic.
Yeah, we see them first.
And of course, it was a race against time to crack the Enigma code, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, yes. So on one of the previous maps, you can see that there are, if we go back another...
I don't think so.
Sorry.
It's all right here. So you can see that there are some observations missing. This was midnight on the 5th of June, so they were still breaking the Enigma code then. And if and then on a further chart, you'll see all the France observations back.
So each day they had to break the code all over again.
Code breaking, spies, and weather observations all came together, and we've got pictures here of the people involved, haven't we, in terms of plotting those weather observations. Tell me about this.
Okay, so you can see there are a lot of women here. So there's two reasons. Obviously, women were involved in all aspects of the war, but also that we would have had lots of men qualified to do all these jobs, but they were all sent overseas. They'd had to go to the other theatres of war, the Far East, the Middle East. So we had to bring women into the UK to carry out their roles here. And all the observations that were taken at land sites around the UK and coming in from Ireland as well, they all came in via the either graphic network down here by these wonderful teleprinters, or the wireless receiving room up here for things that were a bit further away, so they weren't actually attached to the telegraph network.
So they're plotting the obs, and actually very few men overall. This photograph of the team at the time in Dunstable, couple of guys at the front there, but yeah, women pretty much holding the fort.
Well, I would just say that guy is Met Office Chief Forecaster CKM Douglas, who was pretty much the leading synoptic forecaster of his time and kind of crucial to the D-Day forecasting.
Yeah, but there were lots of different forecasts, weren't there? I mean, you often hear it said that if you stick 4 weather forecasters in a room, you end up with 5 different weather forecasts. I'm sure that's not the case in the Met Office, but yeah, here in the Met Office we have a chief meteorologist who takes all of the information and comes up with an overall assessment of what's going on. And effectively, this is Group Captain James Stagg. His role was important, wasn't it?
Yes, so I mentioned Douglas before, so he was the role of the Met Office Chief Forecaster. But there wasn't just the Met Office involved in this forecast. You had the US Air Force at Wide Wing creating a forecast. You had the RAF involved, the Navy involved, the Met Office forecast. And all of those different and often widely differing forecasts were all being fed in by telephone conferences to Stagg. And he then had to try and get everyone to agree on the forecast, which he'd then take forward to the Joint Chiefs. And as they approached D-Day and the weather became very, very unsettled, it was really hard to get them to agree. And you can tell from his diary that it was really difficult. It was nobody agrees with anybody else, and it's all becoming a nightmare. And actually, at one point, he went to the Joint Chiefs and gave his report, and afterwards, one of them commented there was 6'3" of Stagg and 6'2" of gloom.
Yeah, because of course he was a very tall man, and he looks like he's got a lot on his mind there in that picture, doesn't he?
Classic Dora Scott.
And it all came together in the end. This is the resultant weather map here. We've got the UK in the middle. Low pressure, yes, but high pressure ridging in, and that provided that crucial weather window, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It was marginal. He always said it would be marginal, and it was even more marginal than they thought it was going to be in the end. When the cloud conditions were not good, some of the airborne troops landed miles off course, and the Americans didn't dare bomb the beaches because they couldn't see enough. And it was choppy. A lot of the people that took part, they'll often say afterwards how they got seasick and it was not pleasant crossing. But yeah, it was just about good enough. And of course, because it was so marginal, that's one of the main reasons that the German forecasters didn't forecast it.
Yeah, because you had a chap going home, didn't you?
We did, yeah. Rommel.
Yeah.
Rommel, he went home for his wife's birthday party and presented her with some Parisian shoes. So it just shows you they really weren't expecting this. They weren't expecting that break.
And that made such a difference because there was thousands more troops that could have been stood up to the Atlantic wall, as it was called, ready for. They knew this was the window. They knew this was likely to happen, but those troops weren't stood up, which made a huge difference to the invasion.
Ultimately, turning point of the war, you could argue, most important weather forecast of all time.
I would.
Yes.
And quite remarkable, really, to think that was 75 years ago, before supercomputers, and before we had all these observations around the world and from satellites and so on, and all the knowledge that we've got now. Just incredible. You could say it's a mixture of hard work and luck, right?
Definitely luck.
Could argue nothing's changed in 75 years. Fascinating to learn about all of that. I've certainly learned a lot about the history of D-Day and how important the weather forecast was. So thank you, Catherine and Rebecca.
Thank you, Aidan.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Questions. Have we had any questions in?
Yes, we've had quite a few questions in. Thank you very much for sending your questions to us. And yes, first one from Justin Dunkerley. In Facebook, he's saying, will it rain for the weekend because he is fishing? Well, sadly, in the northeast on Saturday, the low pressure is centred just to the east of the coastline. So you get some stronger winds, outbreaks of rain. That rain originates from the south on Friday. More about that in a moment. So Sunday's looking like your best day. Will it thunder in Cornwall? That's Callum Evans. Well, got a real battle going on at the moment with returning polar maritime air pushing down from the northwest and some very warm and humid air bubbling up across the near continent, and that's where we're seeing some thunderstorms. So there's a real clash between two air masses at the moment, and what that means, there's always a risk that the air is going to be unstable enough to produce quite heavy showers through the afternoon. We're expecting that, and always the risk of thunder, particularly across the south and the southeast through the next few days. No warnings out for that at the moment, but there is a yellow warning in force for heavy rain tonight across Northern Ireland. Again, we'll be chatting about that in a moment. Somebody is heading to Abersoch, where I was last week. That's in Northwest Wales, the Lynn Peninsula. Laurie and Norton on Facebook. Will it be a nice weekend? Well, again, that rain will be with you on the Saturday, a bit better on Sunday. However, the prognosis into next week at the moment isn't looking great. We are expecting the weather to remain fairly unsettled with some fairly cool air over us. However, Aidan, you've got a nice map to show us. There is a reason why we do need the rain. We'll be talking about the heavy rain coming up from the south on Friday, and that's pretty much where we do need it, isn't it?
Yeah, now this just shows 4 different maps, and they look at the 4 most recent seasons. So on the far left of your screen there, you've got summer and then autumn, winter and spring. Just wanted to show you that the browns on their map, this is rainfall over these seasons, rainfall anomalies. So where it's brown, it's drier than normal, and across some parts of England, it's been drier than normal in all 4 of the most recent seasons. So yeah, some places are fairly dry at the moment. Some people have been crying out for rain, especially southeastern parts of England, East Anglia, and yeah, you'll get it at times over the next week or 2, because there will be plenty of wet weather out there. After that hot start to the season, the rain has arrived.
But I wonder how low those reservoirs are in the south, because they do deplete quite quickly when there is no rain. And we're coming into the season now where we don't get any appreciable rain because it evaporates quite quickly. So we do need that really important rain and wet weather through the colder months where it doesn't evaporate. So yeah. I'm wondering how low it is, and whether the rain we're seeing in the next few days will add any value to that, will top up the aquifers.
Yeah, I'm sure it can't hurt, but it will help to water people's gardens, won't it?
Yeah, oh God, yeah.
Help to water. Friday's looking like a particularly wet one in the southeast. And of course, over the next few days, it never rains everywhere all the time, so there'll be windows of fine weather, there'll be opportunities to get out. But essentially, what have we got at the moment? The jet stream, we always blame the jet stream. It's diving to the south of the UK. Now let's put on the temperatures there. This is Tuesday afternoon. And the hot weather that we had at the weekend, that's been shoved into the continent, but it's important because it will play a role in our weather over the next few days. Now, the jet stream, of course, helps to move areas of low pressure around, and they're essentially being shoved from the Atlantic, diving south over the Iberian Peninsula, and they're just going to come up across the UK from a southerly direction. Now, as that happens, one after the other, at least 3 or so happening in the next few days, you can see them, this conveyor belt of low pressure systems moving up from that jet stream. Now, as they move up via the continent, they pick up some of that humidity from the continent. And what does that mean? Well, they're going to come loaded with wet weather, aren't they? And that's what we're seeing essentially this afternoon. Now, you mentioned the wet weather in Northern Ireland. Let's pause it there. That's this evening. And essentially, it's a wet end to the day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. And the brighter colours there you can see heading into eastern parts of Northern Ireland. That's where there is a rain warning at the moment. 20 to 30 millimetres, 40 plus in some parts, so County Down, Antrim, Armagh. And yeah, it's going to be horrible out there, Tuesday rush hour.
However, I think the rain's going to be slowly clearing away from this zone here, so you may get a little bit of respite before any showers tomorrow, but it's moving all northwards, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and tomorrow looks horrible across parts of Scotland. This is heading into tonight, and the rain band stalls across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and it only slowly peters out through Wednesday. A brighter day to come for England and Wales, but some potent downpours for western parts.
You can see these showers developing quite readily. I wonder if that's going to be a convergence line there, with those showers just developing across this line up towards the Severn. Yes, and obviously this is quite potent as well, as you were saying.
Yeah, so that humidity over the continent setting off some serious thunderstorms, and you can see them coming north out of the continent, no longer as thunderstorms, but as just some wet weather.
Yeah.
And there's been a bit of uncertainty about this system, how far east it was likely to be, how far west, how far east, but it looks likely that it will move through the North Sea and then bring a wet day to the northeast of Scotland for Thursday. So some wet weather around, but actually Thursday's looking mostly dry across
possibly the best day of the week for many areas. My daughter's in Llandudno with 30 other kids aged 9. So I'm hoping the teachers will have some dry weather to keep them amused. We don't want the rain on that day. But yes,
Steve
it does look,
doesn't care.
no, it's looking very busy, isn't it? The weather across the northwestern part of Europe.
So that's Thursday's weather. Rain pushing into the northeast of Scotland. A drier interlude, but with some heavy downpours elsewhere. And then there's this little feature coming along just to the south of us, and that's going to bring more wet weather in. So I mentioned the wet weather across southeastern parts of England. This is the one to watch for the start of Friday, isn't it? And really it's Friday morning, chucking it down out there.
So it's the M5, M4, just pushing up M6. That's where there'll be a lot of surface water issues through the day. Commuter time's all day really on those motorways on a Friday, isn't it? And then some really strong winds. The winds could pick up to gale force across Channel coasts later on as that low really sort of gradually drifts its way northwards. So again, that could be an issue. High waves, obviously that rain continuing across the bulk of the country into Saturday as well.
Yeah, this is Saturday, so a wet start for northern Britain. Heavy showers soon getting going across England and Wales, and well, it's going to feel quite cold out there to the north of Scotland as well as the winds come around from the North Sea. And into Sunday, well, that clears away, but another low to the south there. So we're in one of those situations, aren't we, where the jet stream is in a stubborn south-shifted position and it's just going to hurl up one system after the other.
Thomas Hapgood on YouTube saying, what's the weather like next week in Butlins? I don't know which Butlins you're going to. I've actually been to all of them, I think, as a record.
Well, you could probably say
it's going to be okay once that rain clears. But generally speaking, we're under very a cyclonic regime into next week. Temperatures will be struggling again. They're going to be slightly below average. So it's dodging those showers and embracing the sun when it comes out. That's all I can say for that, really. Yes, North Hampshire, there's my daughter, that's Andy Duff's daughter's 18th birthday barbecue, hoping for dry weather. It doesn't say which day it's on. So which day would you suggest, Aidan?
North Hampshire,
Friday.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming it's more of the weekend. And actually it's looking, Saturday's looking much better, isn't it? Sunday, more rain coming along. Friday's looking wet. Friday evening might be a bit better. Yeah, it's choosing your moments. Can you postpone your daughter's 18th birthday?
No, absolutely not.
It will be, I don't know, it'll be fun anyway.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
Legally allowed to drink, so yeah.
Drink responsibly.
Drink, yeah.
Anyway, so the podcast is coming out later this week. We've got one on tornadoes, which is really interesting. 2 of our forecasters have headed over to Tornado Alley, and we discussed what they're doing over there before they went. Hopefully they're safe there. They'll be analysing deep convection, and we'll be discussing that, and an interesting hazard weather testbed experiment which is happening here at the Met Office at the moment. Also the Weather Snap podcast, where we'll be talking about D-Day again and also about the heat across India, but also touching on the severe weather happening at the moment in the deep south across the USA. So 2 podcasts to listen to this week.
A couple of comments about a Wirecast issue. So sorry if there are any technical problems, but we'll hopefully iron out those technical problems for next week. Join us again. We'll be back at 1 p.m. same time.
Before I go, Mark Swan, who's one of our people who works here sometimes, it's his birthday today, so happy birthday, Mark.
I completely forgot.
And he's in a darkened gallery just next door trying to keep everything together. He's done a very good job along with Simon, Adrian and Steve today, so thank you to you guys as well. And thank you very much to Catherine and also Rebecca for all their words of wisdom on D-Day.
Really interesting stuff. And thank you for joining us and thank you for your questions. Back again next week. Bye-bye.